Thank you. So we're here today to talk about the Project Management Certificate. It's a course that's offered a couple of times a year, and the next offering will be in the fall. One of the objectives for the certificate is to help people understand and get better at project management, and we'll talk about some of the other objectives that we have as well. There are a wide variety of topics that are part of this certificate. We'll be talking about project and project management. I'll mention that in just a moment here. We'll be talking about the arc of a project, getting it going, initiating it, and planning a project. And then we'll also, in the course, talk about executing and control and getting a project finished, closing it down. One of the trends in project management over the last several decades has been plan-based projects, predictive projects, where you plan it all out from the beginning, versus doing a project one stage or one step, one iteration at a time. Agile project management has become very popular over the last few years, and this type of adaptive project management we'll discuss as well. There are also projects that are being run using a combination of these methods, plans and iterations, and we'll talk about that in the class as well. Soft skills are important to project leadership, and we'll talk about leadership and communication quite a lot in the course. We'll also dig into the tools and techniques of project management. So by the end of the course, you should be pretty aware of and getting very good at a lot of the ideas that are important to project leaders. One of the reasons that project management is important these days is the certification that's available from the Project Management Institute. It's the Professional Society for Project Leaders. They publish the PMBOK Guide, the Project Management Body of Knowledge. We'll talk about that during the course as well. And they offer the certification for project management professionals, or PMPs, and that'll be a part of the class as well. By the end of the course, you'll be aware of what the PMP certification process includes, and you'll have several of the requirements that are necessary to sit for the exam and complete the process. Several of those you'll have finished by the end of the course. Talk briefly about myself. I've been leading projects for many decades. I've done that for Hewlett-Packard. I worked at Visa for a number of years, quite a number of other organizations. I've also been an educator for several decades. I've taught classes at UC Berkeley. I actually ran the project management program for the extension there for several years before I retired from UC Berkeley. I've taught for San Francisco State. I've taught for the University of San Francisco, for the American Management Association, and for others, in addition to this course for Sonoma State. I've written several books on project management. The most recent is the 4th edition of Identifying and Managing Project Risk that just came out earlier this year. I've been a certified project management professional, PMP, for quite a long time, and I've helped an awful lot of people complete that certification, hoping that some of the folks that we have in the class this fall will be interested in that and will do that for themselves. Educationally, I have an MBA in finance. I have bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering, and a lot of that ties directly into project leadership and project management. The objectives for the course are several. We want to build fundamental knowledge of project management, digging into the tools and skills and techniques that project leaders need to be good at. We'll be developing skills and concepts, specific ideas like project charters, work breakdown structures, project plans, project reporting, digging into the sort of nuts and bolts of project management. We'll be looking at ways to manage project situations and problems that arise as we run projects. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we'll also be discussing the PMP certification process so that you can be prepared to sit for the PMP exam from the Project Management Institute. So what is a project? A project's something that is unique. It's a one-time endeavor. We create a product or deliverable that is unique to each project. Each project has a beginning and an end, and each project has resources that it requires to get the work done. Often that's shown as a triangle. That's on this slide. And project management is a set of skills and tools and techniques that help us to achieve those project goals. The overall goals for project management are to meet or exceed the expectations of our stakeholders, all of the people that are interested in the project because they need the results, or they manage the work, or they have some other relationship to the project as a whole. Project management strives to achieve goals by balancing trade-offs between time, cost, quality, resources, and other types of constraints. We want to manage change through iterative planning and progressive elaboration, moving through the work and digging deeper into it as we go from the beginning of the project into the planning phases and into the completion and final deliverable. We want to build teamwork, trust, contributor relationships. Projects are about people. And of course, we'll talk a good deal about leadership in the course. And establishing effective communications. Communication is really job one for any project leader. It's the most important thing that project leaders typically do. And it's something that every good project leader is pretty good at. Project processes include those that start the work to initiate it. And of course, a lot of that effort is at the front end of a project. Throughout the project, but mostly toward the beginning, we put a lot of effort into planning. The heavy lifting for a project is actually executing the work and getting it done, controlling what's going on. So that's the middle toward the end. And then, of course, at the close of a project, we want to bring things to a conclusion, deliver what we've created, the result that we've achieved, and to then move on to the next project. These are the main phases of a project, and they can be looked at in several different ways. I mentioned predictive and adaptive. Those are the two primary types of projects that people do these days. Predictive or more traditional projects are planned from the beginning to the end. Normally that's through a succession of phases or stages. And if the work can be easily defined at the beginning, that's the kind of project management that you typically will see. Developing products, often that's done with predictive. Building houses, constructing bridges. Traditional projects typically use planned approaches. Software and other types of process work frequently are approached using adaptive or agile methods. And this is good for novel things where the definition is not terribly clear at the beginning, perhaps. It's also good for smaller projects, especially projects where things are likely to change as the project work proceeds. And as I said, there are ways to combine these two methods, and we'll talk briefly in the class about hybrid methods as well. For predictive projects, you typically have phases with names like what we see on this slide, requirements, and then studying and defining and developing and testing, and then finally delivering on those results. We can see here that those phases I mentioned a moment ago basically move from the beginning toward the end in the sequence that aligns with those phases. Different kinds of projects have different phase names. Construction, software, pharmaceutical projects, you can see the phases that you might move through with these types of projects. And we'll talk briefly about applying a plan-based approach to different types, different environments where projects are run. For these adaptive or agile projects, the front end looks very similar. We initiate and we do some planning up front, and then we move through a succession of cycles or iterations where we deliver more and then a little more and then a little more. In a stepwise way, we achieve the objectives that the project has. And then at the end, again, very similar, we close down the work by delivering a result. Often you see pictures in Agile that show some kind of a cycle. Across the top of this slide, you see the initiation work. the initial planning, the high-level design, and then we go through some number of iterations. It might be 2 or 3, it might be 10 or 11, whatever the number may be. We go through those iterations, and then at the close of the project, the final iteration delivers a sufficient result, and we then accept that, deliver the deliverable, and move on. I mentioned that soft skills are a very important part of project management. So leadership is a very big topic for project leaders. Transitioning into a leadership role is one of the topics we'll talk about in the course. We'll also talk about developing and managing teams, the contributors who do the work on our projects, motivating those contributors, building teamwork so that we work together smoothly and effectively. We'll talk a lot about project communications and meetings and reporting, all of the things that we do to keep people aware of what the project is up to. Stakeholders are key to any project. They get the project going. They care about what it achieves, and we need to keep those folks happy. So managing stakeholder expectations is an important part of project management as well. Project leaders have a lot of responsibility, but they may not have a great deal of authority. It's very common for project leaders to have responsibility for the work, but not necessarily a great deal of power within an organization. So how do you influence? How do you have control when you have only modest authority? Topic that's important for very important for project leaders as a whole. And then we'll talk about leading different kinds of teams, cross-functional teams where there are people coming from a lot of different areas, remote teams, global teams. That's basically the way project management in the modern world seems to operate. Talked earlier about some techniques and ideas that are important to project management. Requirements and scope are where the work generally begins. Even with Agile, we define this in a relatively cohesive way to get the work begun. So what do requirements look like? Building a work breakdown structure. Work breakdown structure is the project management term for sort of a to-do list. It's an organized, hierarchical to-do list. And it's a concept that we use to build up the information we need to understand and then to control the work as we carry it forward. We use the work breakdown structure to build a schedule, to understand what sequence of the work will be, whether that's an iterative approach or whether that's a plan-based approach. We have to set those dates in place and manage the time. We also have to understand the resources, the money, the people, and any other resources a project requires. We'll talk about managing project risk. Anything that's unique does have risk associated with it. Managing project quality, delivering the value that people are looking for at the end of the work. Managing change is a very important part of every project. How do you do that? We'll talk about that in some detail. Establishing and managing a baseline for a project, whether that's a baseline that we reestablish after each iteration in the case of Agile projects, or a baseline that we establish within the early planning work so that we then take that information and use it to control the work as we carry it forward. And we'll also talk about using project management software. Part of the goal of any project is to organize the information and to deliver a clear message about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and when it's going to get done. Project management software is an important part of that, particularly with large, complex projects that will help us to understand the work as we carry it forward. I mentioned the Project Management Institute. It's a professional society for project leaders that's been around now for about 5 decades. It's well established. They publish the PMBOK guide, the Project Management Body of Knowledge. I'll talk about that in a moment here, but that's a reference that a lot of project leaders have come to depend on a great deal over the history of the Project Management Institute. They do offer the professional certification, PMP, And there are hundreds of thousands of members all over the world, many local chapters worldwide, including one that's right here in the Sonoma County wine country area. PMI.org is their website, and there's a lot of good information out on the PMI website for people who have interest in the organization. PMBOK Guide is published every 4 years. The most recent edition, the 7th, came out in 2021. It's a reference that basically is used by project leaders to help organize their work. And one of PMI's biggest contributions over the last decades has been establishing a relatively coherent, well-understood vocabulary for project management. A lot of that comes from, in this current edition, the principles of project management. I'll talk about that in a second here, and the performance domains that make up the book that PMI has published. The PMBOK Guide is free as a PDF to PMI members, and of course it's a published book that anybody can acquire, and it'll be the textbook for a large portion of the course that we'll be doing this fall. So what are the principles? They're here: stewardship, building teams, managing stakeholders, I mentioned that a moment ago, delivering value, systems thinking, leadership, tailoring the work. Every project is different, so the way we apply the processes and the practices will vary from project to project. Quality matters. We want to make sure that the value that we have signed up for, that we've actually committed to deliver, is actually there at the end of the project. Managing complexity. Of course, all projects deal with a great deal of that. Managing risk, uncertainty is a part of the background of any project. Anything unique does have risk associated with it. Adaptability, resiliency. How do you work around problems and the unforeseen as it comes along? And of course, managing change. One of the reasons we do projects is to change things. And during a project, things are likely to change within, and managing that change is an important responsibility for any project leader. The performance domains are these 8 items. Again, stakeholders, the team, very important to deal with the people that surround our project. We talked a little bit briefly about the approach and the life cycle: hybrid, plan-based, various other alternatives. Planning is central to every project, whether it's done using adaptive or predictive methods. We want to understand what the next steps are. Managing the work, executing it, and getting it done is central to any project leader's responsibility. Finally, delivering what we have committed to. And then also, within any project, it's useful to know where you are. The question, are we there yet, is important on any journey. And within a project, measurement is one of the ways we answer those questions as to where we are within the project and how we're doing. Uncertainty is another aspect of projects, and it's related very closely to risk. Very central to the PMBOK Guide, going back many versions. This, I said, was the 7th version of the PMBOK Guide. All of the PMBOK Guide editions before this have also invested pretty heavily in managing uncertainty and risk. If you're interested in PMP certification, the certification that's available from PMI, it does have some requirements. The most common way that you qualify to sit for the test is to have a university degree with about 3 years of project leadership experience. There are other options, but that's the most common. You also need to have had 35 hours of formal project management education. The course that we have here at Sonoma State does qualify for that. And then at the end of the qualification process, you sign up for and take a 4-hour, 180-question exam that basically probes your knowledge of project management and project leadership. A little under half of the test is based on your relationship with people, soft skills. That's an important part of any project leader's responsibility. Half of the exam is about process, and we'll talk a great deal about that in the course this fall. And about 8% of it is business environment. And some of that varies project to project, but it's important for project leaders to understand the why of a project. And a lot of that comes back to the business imperatives, the value that we deliver. If you're interested in the PMP certification process, there's a certification guide that's on the PMI website. And I strongly encourage that if anybody is interested in that, they spend some time with that, and we can answer questions about what all of it means and how you might go about qualifying. Next class starts in September. There are 13 online sessions. They're going to be done by Zoom. They're in the evening from 6 to 9 p.m. And there's more information on the Sonoma County, on the Sonoma State website that you can find on the website. And as they approach the date for the class, we'll be updating the material that's available there. Hope you can join us, and I look forward to meeting anybody that's interested in taking the class.